Hi, my name is Nolan Hack. I'm a black revolutionary from Los Angeles, California.
I'm Derrick. I am a writer in Texas.
I am John Kane. I host a couple of radio shows, one in New York City and one on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. And I am a Native activist. I am a Mohawk, and I live in Seneca territory.
Julie Dye. I'm a Native activist from Michigan, Potawatomi.
Yari Chaska, interested in the liberation of Seminole.
I'm Tanja Burkhard, a black German woman in Pittsburgh.
I just realized, Nolan, that you and I never say that we're black, because I guess it's because we have videos.
Well, I was say black,
assume that
and
we
then
black.
Well, yeah.
I never say.
Oh,
that
wait,
I'm black.
you guys are black?
Yeah.
No, Nolan just say black.
Apparently.
If only we lived in that world.
Apparently. Anyways.
I don't see color on radio.
Oh. But don't you feel like you can kind of you can guess? There are like vocal cues that give you a hint, even though sometimes those are like deceptive.
Absolutely, I can pick that up in Native people too. Even sometimes place them, to some extent. So yeah, it's real. If you pay attention, you can pick that stuff up.
Anyway,
That was a fun little detour. Okay, so topic tonight: Native and Black excellence in our two communities, and obviously our two communities have been hit hard for a very long time, and that's why when we succeed, it's so important to acknowledge the folks who are succeeding and talk about it and see the ways that we are succeeding, the channels we're taking. If you look at the stats of education for both of our communities, so 80% of black people over the age of 25 have high school diplomas. But you look at, in terms of bachelor's degrees, it's about 20%, so in terms of having a college degree. And then Native people, it's 65% high school graduation rate. And if you look at college graduation rate, it's only about 9.3%. Now, obviously, both of us are running through mazes the moment we're born, or trying to dodge metaphorical landmines, by comparison to a white kid, we're trying to run in a race with them with our legs cut off.
Anyways, we're going to get to the positive
Yeah,
stuff.
I was just putting, yes.
We got it. We know what the context is.
Derrick's idea. I was just laying out the context. There you go. But, yes, so I think that's what makes it more sweet, though, when we do succeed and we do have moments.
Even when I want to throw it to the ladies first. It's International Women's Day. That's what I was going to say. That's why I cut you off.
Ladies first. Let's do it.
I'm sorry, girl. Anybody?
I guess I'll go first. So if we're talking about indigenous achievements, I think that I find it very interesting if you look at specifically one indigenous group, the Mayan, and their achievements, starting with the fact that the invention of a zero with a symbol. So that's like very specific because it's not just the use of zero, it's with the symbol. And it's actually because of a cosmological understanding, like of pretty much spending most of the time trying to understand time. And then on top of that, like a comprehensive writing system. It's actually one of only 5 original ones in the world. And then you got like all the books like the Dresden Codex, where literally this synodic period of Venus is being calculated before Copernicus. So my point of bringing up these facts is that nobody really, in general, says things like, "Did you know Mexicans invented this?" Because mine are people from quote unquote what we call Mexico now. So it's very interesting that these demons are not associated with people like me. We're not seen as that. So I think that's like something very important to point out, that something that indigenous people in general could be proud about, and then specifically people from what is called quote unquote Mesoamerica, but I rather call Meso-Anahuac, like in our Nahuatl language, for Anahuac. And these achievements are not associated with us. We're just seen as either like just we're the gardeners, we're the workers, and I reflected on this because there was at one point a European lady on TV saying, "I didn't know Mexicans were smart," because it was some girl that was like high achieving in college. So it's kind of interesting, and then it also removes indigenous children from feeling proud too, because they think that there are people that did not invent things. So I just want to throw those facts out.
I just wanted to say that I heard about like the Zenith Day and like Mayan temples that mark it from this great course class that I have, because I'm a nerd and I buy audiobooks about subjects that I'm interested in. But when I heard about that, it really, really made me want to go to Mexico City and see like the Zenith Day passage, and it's just like this thing with the sun, and that's just something really, really small. But yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, but they're like very like big achievements. This is like predating science, but supposedly what we call scientific, the scientific method or things like that, or the era of science.
Exactly. That's an amazing. There was also, I don't know, I'm just really, really interested. I don't know what people or tribe that would be. I know it said it in the course, but I can't. It doesn't come to mind.
Well, it would be the Mayan, the one that you're saying, probably Chichen Itza, where the solstice, and then you can see the Kukulkan shadow go down. So it's basically they set up the pyramid to literally align and create that shadow.
I would really, really love to see that one day. Like with my own eyes, not just, but yeah. I think the pyramids also, there's like this picture that was going around on Twitter the other day, that the pyramids in Egypt, like there's like this one day every like 2,000 some odd years where it's like, it was Mercury, Venus, and Saturn, that all three of them aligned. It was like overhead on all three of them. I'll find that picture.
Which actually just reminded me of something that you stated, that because there was a recent discovery where they did laser scans in the jungle with satellites, and then they used augmented reality to kind of see if there was something in there. So they found like a lot of like more Mayan structures, and they actually in the article it finally admits that my people were more advanced than the Roman and the Greeks. And that's like something that was seen as like impossible maybe 30, 50 years ago, because people actually taught that we didn't have philosophy, which is a lie.
No native person should ever feel like bad about the Greeks stole all their stuff from Egypt, so don't ever make. I think Black people also grew up in like this world where like our achievements and like the things that just African societies did accomplish and how instrumental they were in just throughout world history. The Bible, all throughout the Bible, there are talks of like African rulers, Taharka, who is said by the Jews who supposedly saved the Jewish faith. When he comes to their rescue, they were going to be annihilated. All of those things are always denigrated, or we don't have enough education to know that those things are concerning Black people. They're talking about Black people, Black nations, Black technologies, Black. There's such a strong parallel there. Tanya's always trying to hide.
You know what? I had a very painful dental appointment, and I almost didn't make it, but I really wanted to listen to you guys today.
Okay.
Yeah, I always, and I know this, I know that obviously our people, either people have been excellent throughout history, and that without their contributions, all these other things wouldn't even exist. I just struggle sometimes with the push towards defining excellence today, or how some folks use excellence, like academic excellence, and how an academically excellent student or person should be, because oftentimes I find that this like more general discourse is kind of steeped in whiteness again. So I love examples from excellence of excellence that aren't trying to align a person with like white ideals and white ideologies, or like neoliberal capitalist ways of seeing excellence of like
right. Oh, he was the first millionaire.
Yeah, so completely revolutionized things, and now has all this wealth accumulated for themselves or whatever. So I love those examples on your part. I don't have it.
Thanks.
Yeah. I'm in so much pain. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Julie.
Of course, Native people are so talented to begin with, as far as what we're doing to uplift our people. I've noticed that my tribe included have done a lot to bring our language back, save our language, and teach the language and bring it to all generations. And another thing that a lot of tribes are doing too is to nutrition. The food sovereignty part, changing the diets from what killed us in the past, diabetes, heart conditions, and everything else from the diet that we had. They're making a lot of changes and improvements in nutrition-wise. I think that's a big thing that we're doing for our people. Outside of the education too, making a lot of our younger people are getting education and going into fields of study that and coming back home and helping their own.
I really want Black people to do that in terms of like farming and stuff. I've read a few articles like over the last few years about Black farmers who are trying to kind of like revitalize that tradition within our community, because I do think that it's something that's gone by like the wayside. I want to say that something like less than 2% of like this nation's farmers are Black, and that's like down from a time where like mostly a large percentage of us would have been Black. And I think some of that follows like the Great Migration, when a lot of people went into like huge cities like New York and Chicago and stuff like that. I've never lived in any of those places, so I don't know how difficult it would be to reintroduce that knowledge. I don't know if it's something that's only like worth focusing on, like maybe like Southern Black people, where maybe it's a little bit more feasible. But I do think that's something that we need to be a little bit more adamant about.
I think the world forgets in general, though, like that a lot of the food was produced. Like, it's not something that indigenous people found on the ground and was like, oh, okay, here's an avocado, here's corn. It was actually stuff we sat there and, like, maybe you could call it more like archaic or pre-GMO. I know a lot of people don't like GMO, but it's literally genetic engineering by selective breeding.
Right.
So we literally sat there and developed different types of potato, different types of maize. Some is like Pueblo people, I think, developed one that was like more resistant in harsh environments, So it's kind of like, I think the world tends to forget that sometimes that they're literally living off of us still.
Right.
I always say that the only thing that white folks had on us before they came over and ruined everything was guns and warfare. I mean, whether it was agriculture, education, architecture, you name it.
The second oldest university, that is still open today and that we know of, is in Africa.
Timbuktu.
Yep.
Yeah, that. In fact, there's there's 700,000 manuscripts in the Sankore University in Timbuktu, and there was a French student studying algebra and translating one of the manuscripts from Arabic to French, and that he ended up saying, "Oh, yeah, actually, this stuff was taught in universities in Timbuktu before the 16th century."
Right.
So again, I mean, unless we're talking about bloodlust, we weren't behind at all. And a lot of stuff they copied from the both of us, including their very own Constitution, the United States Constitution, from the Iroquois. And then they, of course, ruined that.
Rice was the first profitable agricultural commodity for the colonies, and they got that from Africans in West Africa who had been, I don't know the terminology for producing rice, but had been making rice for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. One of the very first things that slaves do when they get to the Americas is they start creating rice. And actually, rice is what gave the people who worked with it, and I'm blanking on their names, just like I'll look them up very shortly, but it gave them a certain resistance to malaria. And when Europeans saw that resistance to malaria, that's one of the things that helped them germinate this idea of, oh, these people might be good for slavery, because a lot of people, a lot of white colonists were dying as they came here.
That's a good point. There's a movie coming out called.
Go, John.
I was gonna mention. Yeah, this was only barely alluded to earlier, but I think one of the problems that I have, even with the foundation of the conversation, is the measure of excellence and the measure of success. I mean, because what happens invariably is that we're using the ruler established by, or a ruler, I mean the measuring tool established by Europeans. I mean, if you follow what, academia regards as the trajectory of humanities and of civilization, yeah, they'll pinpoint Egypt and, the Tigris and Euphrates, but then it goes through Greece and Rome and then the Christian nations of Europe. And we have a tendency to measure success or excellence on all of those models, including civilization. I mean, we look at civilization as if that is the pinnacle of measuring the success of a people or the development of a people. When I would make the argument that in many ways, the advancement of civilizations are failures of a people on many levels, because it is through civilization that the gross hierarchies are so firmly implanted in society. So, I do caution, and look, we know that we can cite example after example of achievements of peoples, indigenous peoples all over the world, and I don't mind having that conversation. I just caution about not slipping into the measure of advanced civilization based on. I mean, we talk about Cahokia, and the first thing somebody says about Cahokia, oh, that was a city the size of Paris at the same point in time in human development, and it's like, so that's what we're going to measure it against, and we're not going to measure why Cahokia had problems, and even as we talk about the development in Central and South America, there may be stark achievements to point to, and there are many of them. But at the same time, most of the solutions and the achievements were born out of the very adversity that was caused by congregations of overpopulation of small areas and that kind of stuff, which has really been part of humanity's failing.
I think that's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
A really good point.
I think the reason, though, that sometimes, like the example of Cahokia being bigger than Paris is because people, like you said,
right.
they can't imagine another pinnacle society besides something in Europe. But like I said, if you say philosophy, what pops in your head is like some Greek statue,
mm-hmm.
right? So it's like, that's why I think those comparisons are made when people are throwing out information, because until we can rewrite, like literally hit like our books and our vision and our history, then that's when we won't be saying, like even now if I say Meso-Anahuac or Anahuac Seminole, like people will be like, what are you talking about? You know, like they don't even know what location I'm talking about. So until then, I think then when we start flipping the narrative and saying like, you know, that we had bigger, we don't have to use that whole comparison of, well, we had philosophy too, like the Greeks.
See, and what I say is we made the same mistakes those people did. That's the way I view it. When I think about Cahokia and this massive congregation and overpopulation of a small area, I regard that as a mistake that our people too made. And not just, and I'm not just picking on Cahokia, but you know, all across, you know, many of our territories have, you know, you can still find remnants of villages that were way too large to, to support, you know, for nature, for creation, to support it. And those are not, we still have a tendency to call those things pinnacles, as opposed to, you know, if you look at an evolutionary chain, I like to think sometimes that when people say, well, what happened to Cahokia? What happened to those advanced civilizations? And I said, and my answer is, we continue to advance. And we move beyond what you're measuring as success and moved into successes that really returned us back to perhaps what some of those quote unquote successes, distracted us from.
Nolan, you and I were having a version of this conversation when we were talking about Egypt. Oh, and I want to say, and I'm just going to quote this just because this white man said it, if it's not right, please correct me. But they were saying that, like, how do you say Mexico City, but not like the indigenous name for it? It's like Tenochtitlan or something.
Oh, Tenochtitlan, yeah.
Yeah, I know I massacred that pronunciation, but in that book that I was reading, they were saying that was actually at its zenith, like it was the third largest city in the world. It wasn't just larger than Paris. Like they were estimating that its population was like 200,000. Even if you assume that that's low, they estimate Cairo at that same time was at like 400,000, and then there was somewhere in China that was like 800,000. They were like the three largest cities.
And unfortunately, it's still in that same ranking right now, isn't it?
It might be. I honestly don't know.
Well,
but
Nigeria,
it's like 25 million
and
people, right?
That's kind of my point. That's kind of my point, though.
Well, Nigeria is overpopulated like crazy, and
Lagos, yeah.
Well, and then the capital, yeah. But just like looking at the whole
Nigeria's
country.
also really rural. It's like there are all those cities, but it's also like in like the northwestern part. Well, that's where a lot of like the violence is happening. But those aren't as populated as much. But yeah, like there are. I mean, yeah, you're starting to see those big cities on the continent of Africa, like with Lagos and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now I'd like to ask a question to each of us. Oh, Cedar, you got something?
I was just going to say that, but we were having the same version of this conversation when you were asking me about like whether like the pharaohs, or like whether that was like a good thing or a bad thing, or like we were having like the same version of this conversation basically.
Oh yeah. How do we view ancient Egypt as a big positive or big negative? Obviously slavery and huge population. There was more of a credo put to superficial
there
things.
Actually is not as well. Go on. That's not relevant. I'm sorry. Go on.
Well, I think some of us, and some of us already said this on this panel tonight. We only view Black or Native history. Well, it's just we don't even talk about Native history in the mainstream, but we only view our histories through an American lens. So, like you talk about Black history, it's like Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King. You don't go back to Mansa Musa or Nefertiti or something like that. So we forget that obviously we're all humans, Black, white, green, whatever. So a lot of the same ideas that we're just going to have. Egypt will have similar ideas, and Rome, Greece, and the Mali Empire, there's a lot of things overlap through time. It's just with colonization, everything got muddled up, and then you erased two people's histories in the process.
It's like, how much of that should you recover, or how much do we want to recover? I'm just trying to connect that back to. Oh, and so, I know that you weren't saying. I just don't. People always bring up slavery when they bring up Egypt because of like the Bible and the Prince of Egypt, and I just want people to know that that is not a true history of Egypt.
Yeah.
There's no documented like evidence of like Jews ever even being in Egypt in a large number. Yeah. And I don't want people to walk away with that impression that slaves built the pyramids, because they did not. You will really annoy some Black and African people if you say that.
Well, the reason to bring up
keep going, go. Yeah,
but the reason to bring up the achievements, like Nolan was saying, is regardless if we sit there and kind of analyze it, like, well, they didn't really do that well because it overpopulated and collapsed or whatever. I mean, it seems to happen around the world. But I think the important part to take out of that is really, or at least for me, the focus would be indigenous children, regardless of where they are in this continent, to know that they too achieve things. It doesn't matter if we've been here and people have. The thing is, the problem is they've only taught that Europeans invented everything. Like, we're like literally people at some point thought they gave us civilization here. So
how many times do you see someone say on Twitter something like, "Oh, well, don't use indoor plumbing" or something like that? Like Europeans,
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's exactly like what it boils down to, and it's really sad, because it's like you got, and then even adding another layer to it is like maybe native people in the northern turtle island would associate more with their achievements. The people down there would be like, that's some people that lived here before. I'm like some other, creature now, or person or thing, that because some conquest came in and we're not really them. Like, literally people don't, like when Jewish people say the history, they say our history. You know what I'm saying? And like, but people like me would be like, oh, those Mayan. It's kind of like pretty sad, because a lot of them, if they would kind of analyze their blood, would end up being Mayan, and it's not very uncommon to think of that. So, and then that's why I think achievements are really good, so we can start dissociating them from like ancient people in the past that existed that are not associated with certain indigenous people anymore.
I don't have anything to argue with that, and that kind of brings me to the question I want to pose to each of us here. What is your definition of, I guess, your definition of achievement within our own communities, whether you be Black or Native on this panel?
My definition of achievement?
Yeah.
Well, my definition of achievement would be something that would land under a new scientific, medicinal, or engineering invention. So that's like I brought up like zero earlier on. I'm going to use that as an example. Regardless of how you see it, that literally led for humanity's like awakening. Like, without zero, we wouldn't even have computers. So right. I see that to me is an achievement. You're literally jumping humans to another level with your achievement by either moving them forward technologically or, because of medicine, right, improving lifespan or things like that. So anything that kind of like you add on to helping humanity. Specifically, I'm just focusing on indigenous things, right?
I just got my first lab grade back, and I got a 94. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I felt like
I would say that's Black excellence.
It's an achievement. I want that.
I would put that in the file right there. Black excellence.
Put that in there.
First of all, congratulations for that. Second, yes, that is Black excellence.
This teacher was playing me at first. He was giving me 89s, and I was like, sir.
Well, I definitely want to hear everybody's particular definition.
Well, I'll weigh in. For me, it's quality of life. I mean, the only way to really measure success of a people, is by the quality of their life, and and whether that quality of life involves technological advancement or whether it just involves elements of a quote unquote happiness index or whatever else. I just you can tie to quality of life, obviously longevity and health and prosperity measured in some manner, I guess. But again, I got to think that with quality of life is where creativity is embraced in terms of everything from the arts to to again problem solving in general, and that it's a moving target. So I think the idea of creating a society that can have a higher quality of life is to me the measure of success. And again, if I go back and look at our history, and even as we struggled with things like violence and the formation of, or the final formation of the Haudenosaunee or the Iroquois League or whatever you want to call it, which it wasn't the first, but it was the final unification, which came with the Ganowida and Hiawatha. Was a huge accomplishment to once again, and it would have been the fourth time in our oral history that we quelled violence amongst us, and then and went about achieving a higher quality of life, spreading the notion of peace and prosperity in that regard. To me, that's achievement, and that's accomplishment. And I know we sometimes can measure things in different ways, but money isn't necessarily it doesn't necessarily equate to quality of life. And I know lots of people who chase lots of dollars, and I know plenty of people with money who still commit suicide and that kind of stuff and suffer from depression. So I again, long-winded, but I would just say quality of life is how I measure achievement.
I think that's best.
Julie, Tanja, Sadar, want to weigh in?
I'm going to go last.
Your definition.
Okay, then I can go next. I think it's so difficult, and I think the term moving target is exactly how I would think of achievement, because in some circumstances I think individual achievement can be just surviving in certain contexts, being still around and being able to live mindfully and find ways to reduce the harm that we do individually to other people, to the planet, to the people around us. I think that can be an achievement for one person. As a race or group of people, I think the achievement should be similar. First, there should be survival, and then there should be constant striving towards betterment for all members of the community, for ethnicity or race, versus just a select handful of privileged people. So I would say we have achieved, once we arrive at some point of that, to where we're not destroying ourselves, each other, and the place that we need to live on. So yeah, I don't know.
Our ultimate achievement.
Yeah, that would.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that the community has to survive as a whole rather than just kudos to the individual achievements, people that get up into compete with white people and move up the ladder and melt into the mainstream. We're not going to make achievements that way, and we need to be able to write our own stories. We need to be able to become relevant and not invisible. And as this country turns browner, hopefully that we'll be able to do that if we can just rid ourselves of the white supremacy that always, enters into every facet of our lives.
I agree. I would say that my definition of achievement for our communities, or the one that I'm, I guess, the most obsessed with, is just the resiliency that I see in both our peoples. Speaking about Black people in particular, to any like black kids who might be listening, or maybe kids too. It goes for both, but seeing just like the resiliency. I don't know if people realize that like black music, for example, is one of like the biggest testaments to like black resiliency. Being able to create all that beauty in a world that has been very painful, taking things that were not positive and channeling them into like this like ceremony, this mix of like air and sounds to like express a feeling, like the blues, R&B. The history of recorded music starts, early 1900s, and that just so happens to coincide with like all of this fantastic black artistry. So like when I like hear popular music that's played today, when it's just so easy just to hear us. And I'm a professionally trained saxophone player. I play soprano and alto. I play jazz music. I play pop music. I grew up in like a black church, like a traditional black church in the South. Like being able to hear like the sounds and the songs of like our people, how they've been, and then knowing that a lot of those songs are connected to older rituals, pre-Christianity. A lot of them, the oldest ones, are like connected to like this ceremony called the ring shout, which is again something carried over by us from Africa to here. Like seeing those things, knowing their importance to our music, and like seeing that continuity through like so much just trauma and abuse. I don't know. That's my example of black excellency, but I definitely do agree, particularly with like the statement that we also have to make living better with the earth, so that we're not living as we now do, our really highest achievement in terms of excellency as human beings. But just speaking specifically about black people, I would say it's probably music.
Well, I'd like to add to that. Obviously, a lot of folks who challenge the narrative that the American education system has put out as this is the history of this country. The black influence on music is one of the things most talks about, as it should be. But I would like to add that the Native influence on music is very important, and I think just from a simplistic standpoint, one, obviously Native people were here first, but you look at so many genres of music and how both of our people have been kind of giving our blood, sweat, and tears to create those things. There's a woman by the name of Catherine Bainbridge. She's a director, Canadian director, and she was saying the African polyrhythms met Native 4 on the floor beat. That's where you had the blues. That's the beginning of what we considered modern American music, which to me kind of just, you look at the whole thing between the two of us, whether we want to admit it or not, we're so connected as two people. It's just, the reason why we have this panel is to try to show folks that, we should be together because we're connected anyways. And I guess if I had to choose a definition, I'd kind of say there are many definitions, as we just heard, many different types of excellence. I think just living in this society each day is excellence, because we're put at such a disadvantage, and to survive continually is a miracle. honestly, from our two people. And I do think at the same time we need to find a medium between, okay, here is the white ideals of excellence, and then here is what is excellent on our side of the table anyways, and then we could still use white society to our advantage. For example, there's a movie coming out called The Woman King. It's with Viola Davis, who featured New Orleans.
Is it Nzinga?
It's about the Dahomey Amazon warriors.
Oh, okay. I thought it was about King Nzinga. Oh, okay. That's cool, too. I want to see that, too.
Yeah. There's another one coming out. I think Michael B. Jordan is putting it out about Mansa Musa, the richest person who ever lived. And wow.
Nzinga was a sovereign in the Congo who fought the Portuguese for 40 years. She was a woman, but she took the title as king and then like married like this harem of like, they called it ladyboys in the literature, but I feel like there's a better word for that, but I don't know what it would be. Or anyway, she was a person who needs a movie, like immediately. So that's what I thought you were describing when you said. I was really excited, but I'm excited. I'm still excited. Did you say Andrew Bassett?
Can I weigh in just? Can I weigh in just for a second? Only because I wanted before we get off the music thing. I still encourage everybody to see the movie Rumble, The Indians Who Rocked the World. It is a phenomenal documentary that really kind of chronicles the influence of Native sounds and Native culture and the melding of Native and Black cultures to create essentially what is modern American music or contemporary American music in many different genres. You know, most people, if you're a jazz person, are you familiar with Mildred Bailey?
Yes.
Now, Mildred Bailey, most people didn't even know that she was Coeur d'Alene from Idaho, and she somehow lands herself in New York, the first woman to have her own radio program on, WCBS radio in New York City. And she ends up being the standard by which a lot of those jazz runs came from. And if you listen to her runs, and she used to call it, this is Mildred Bailey from the old rocking chair, and that was her tagline. But if you listen to her runs, it sounds incredibly like the native music from that Coeur d'Alene area of Idaho, and that it just kind of that same way of leaping those chords is what she brought to jazz. And of course, it goes into Charlie Patton, and of course, the namesake of the film is Rumble, which was Link Wray, who created the power chord for which really set off rock and roll in the first place. But it does an excellent job. So I encourage you if you want to see that, because here's the thing: music is a celebration of life. Even though it oftentimes is something that people use for mourning, and they use it for again, blues can be very sorrowful and that kind of stuff. But even in its most somber tones, it is still a celebration of life. And so I agree with you. I think music does represent one of those stark achievements. But again, I think even that ties back to making music your own and improving your quality of life by taking that music and being able to tell your own story through music. And that's where you see this homogenization of everybody from Jimi Hendrix to, again, Charlie Patton and, country music. I mean, Johnny Cash borrowing, blues from native artists, all the way through. Buffy Sainte-Marie, Pure Fay, and a lot of these people had, were the result of, and I hate to use the expression, but what they were calling race mixing themselves.
And
I just wanted to, keeping on the New York thing, because I know I'm going to forget it, just ballroom culture, which is more of queer culture, but it's Black and Native Latinx queer people. Sometimes people think or sometimes people present that in a way that suggests that like it was like everyone, but it wasn't. Like Black and Indigenous Native queer people were not welcome in white queer spaces, and so they created this culture, ballroom culture, which is basically like street dancing and like it kind of leads into beboxing, but voguing, which you see like with Madonna, she gets that from Black and Hispanic clubs from New York. Like electronic music is really born in that music as well. That was in the 80s. The 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s.
I want to give...
Oh, and I also want to mention that, again, when you talk about beat, so what really lies at the foundation are not only what people regard as, which is pretty universal through a lot of native territories, is some semblance of stomp dance. And that comes through in almost all of these genres of music as well.
I want to give John credit because you actually screened the movie Rumble, the Indians Who Rock the World in New York a couple weeks back. And one of the two directors of that movie was that woman I mentioned, Kathleen Bainbridge.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, she also said something profound. She says, when people hear the traditional music of the American South, they say, that's Indian music. I thought that was African music. And all of the music of the South was informed by the land and therefore by us. She says, black people are the center of it. You look at blues and jazz. But she says, but their experience in America was mixed with the influence of the indigenous people.
Definitely.
Further John's point. So there's the intertwined thing again. You cannot separate the two of us if you tried.
I don't want to. I'm not disputing anything that's been said. I just do want to say there are certain elements of like African performance, like syncopation, like all like the five most commonly used like musical mechanisms like within jazz. One of them is syncopation. One of them is call and response. I do just want black kids to know that there's a continuality with those things. Like they were practiced in Africa and they are also practiced here. I'm not saying that there was not still a mixture and that we are not intertwined. I'm just saying I just want people to know that because so oftentimes people feel that there was nothing that survived from Africa, that we came here and that
of course
I don't know, like we were like our minds are like Etch-a-Sketches, and it's like the ring shout, which is a circular pattern of dance that is done. It's an ancestral dance. Stepping comes out of it. Hip hop comes out of it. All of those things were practiced by Muslims in Africa. They were practiced by various cultures in West Africa. That circular dance is actually so it's practiced in so many varying cultures in Africa. In that book that I was talking to you about a few weeks ago, Slave Culture, they actually make that one of their center motifs for like this connectivity between African cultures that for so long people thought were like, oh, they don't know each other, they don't have any relationship to one another. So yeah, that's not to take away from anything that's been said. I just do want people to know that.
No, and in fact, I'd go even farther with that. And I think the relationship between indigenous people on Turtle Island and the African people who were literally dragged here in chains, I think it's that relationship between the two that facilitated the survival of some of that the African culture. It's because of those relationships, and I think that's what is really important that people understand is that it's not about crediting or discrediting. It's about embracing it all, because I think that really does lie at the core of those relations, and not only just here in what we call Turtle Island here, but even with the Africans who were brought into the Caribbean. You have to remember, native males were shipped out to the Caribbean too, and so a lot of even some of those sounds that came from Haiti and the Bahamas and all of those islands that would make it into mainstream music today, those even have a collaboration between African cultures and indigenous cultures, from the indigenous people who were there and from the indigenous people that were from here who were also brought there in the same way the Africans were. It's an incredible story if anybody to really watch this thing and see this thing play out.
Indigenous people have also been the keepers of like African like religious concepts, just like in South America. Lots of people who practice like the Santeria, and Kambole and like things like that, things that take from Nigerian or were Nigerian deities or presence, the Orisha. That's practiced mostly by Afro-Hispanic people, Afro-Native people. They really were able to retain that knowledge just because of a lot of different factors. But yeah.
But isn't that more in the Caribbean though? I don't know about South America.
It's in Brazil. It's in Mexico. It is in the Caribbean quite a bit, but it's also in Brazil. Except in Brazil, it's called Cambole. I'm pretty sure that's it. Cambole.
Oh, well, I guess I was always heard like Santeria, but like usually practiced by people that are descendants of Africans that were come here. That came, got dragged over here.
One of my favorite African deities, Ilegba, he has his own sects all throughout Brazil and South America. I'm trying to pull it up so I can give you an exact place, but yeah.
Yeah, but Brazil, there's barely any indigenous people left there.
There's more black people than indigenous.
Are there more black people?
Yeah.
I think that's the point I'm trying to bring up.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Got you. I got you.
Yeah.
Well, and then that goes to, also you look at Haiti as well, the Dominican Republic. This whole ball of wax, North and South America was native land in the first place, and then yet you have these high black populations. There goes the connection again. And I was thinking about this going into tonight. I kind of feel like there's a paradox when we succeed in this society, Western society, white society, whatever you want to call it. White folks use it as an excuse to say, well, look at this person. They're doing so well. Racism isn't a thing anymore. See,
I think that we just have to be mindful of that expectation. There's always the people who are going to try to hold the outlier up as like the example of the norm, and we just have to know that that's not the case. And if you are the outlier, then I feel like it's your duty to inform people that that is not the case. That like, just because I did this doesn't mean that everyone else is going to be able to do this just because I had this opportunity. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have to feel bad for that opportunity, well, depending on what it is. But if it's, I don't know, being a singer or something like, just because I was able, or going to an Ivy League, if that's what your aspiration is. Just because you walk through those doors doesn't mean that there are not still structural barriers that will ensure that most people that look like you or who come from where you come from will not. And I just kind of feel like that's our responsibility. And I feel like that's what our people did, like with people like Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was from a middle-class African-American family. Malcolm X was not. And what a lot of people had to do with Martin Luther King was a lot of people who surrounded themselves around Martin Luther King, I think helped him realize that not everyone had his experience. Because I do feel that he, at times, didn't understand necessarily where Malcolm X was coming from. In the same way that Booker T. Washington, I don't feel like, always understood where, like, Du Bois was coming from.
Well, Washington didn't understand for most of us, if we're being perfectly honest, but yeah, you're right. Yeah, go ahead, Illari.
I think that's like the points that were brought up was good points of explaining, like, just because somebody's doing it doesn't mean that everybody else can. But I think that usually when people try to do that, it's like almost like an individual attack, or they try to go like, why aren't you, like kind of like, I'm going to make you feel bad by bringing up this point or something like that. Mm-hmm. When people do that to a person of color, usually it's malignant. It's not to be like, uplifting or something like that. But one of the responses is more like, what is the collective, right? Like the statistical numbers that should reflect there's something wrong there. That's why I always kind of going back, maybe it's a little off topic, but when people start arguments, is there good white people, is there bad white people? But the thing is, it doesn't matter if they're good or bad, because collectively their actions are hurting us. So it doesn't matter if you could go find 10 good ones and 20 bad ones. You know what I'm saying? Or 30, 400. It's like almost like a balance. Like the response to that whole thing of like, why aren't you educated too? It's like, well, you got to look at if a collective group of people are doing bad, there's something wrong in that situation. It's not allowing that to happen.
Well, and the flip side also is not ignoring the fact that when there have been collective successes, that's been met with extreme racism, whether you're talking about the Osage of Oklahoma or Black Wall Street in Tulsa. I mean, whatever when you look at some of the successes that our peoples have had, and then look how it was met. And part of the reason the Cherokee were marched out of Georgia was because the white people were getting pissed at their success. And we see that time and time again, both in Native and in Black communities, even when we've assimilated, which may seem like, okay, well, we're going to beat the white man in his own game. When we've demonstrated success, it has multiple effects, and some of those effects have been violent and costly. I mean, some of the most successful Black communities that ever were victimized by white supremacists, especially in the early 1900s. And Native communities who were showing any semblance of success were seeing the exact same thing.
Yeah, so like going back to the collective measurement, it seems like it's better to measure things collectively than as an individual, because as he pointed out, it's okay to have individual achievements, but once it's a collective thing, it gets dangerous.
Right.
Well, yeah, the Bill Cosby, the old Bill Cosby effect, the new Bill Cosby effect is something completely different. But the old Bill Cosby effect, where if you don't have your pants up, if you have a do-rag on,
Dude, I was listening to an interview by D.L. Hughley, and he was talking about Bill Cosby, about how he would always carry on like that. And, he tried to stop the careers of a lot of, Black, Def Jam comics, because he didn't like that they said, the N-word and all that stuff like that, because he's very, very respectable. And, D.L.'s point was, he got into an argument with Bill Cosby once, and he was like, well, I may say the N-word, but no one's ever brought up rape in a conversation about me. And he says this to him in an interview, and he just talks about how Bill Cosby got the owner of that radio station and shut that interview down, and that's why it never aired. And he was like, if you ever air this, you'll lose your job. I'm sorry.
Well, and we're seeing that we're seeing that with Sherman Alexie on the Native side. Sherman Alexie is being exposed for how much he's tried to control, manipulate, and ruin careers of not just Native women, but other Native writers. So, yeah, I mean, and to your point, the reason measuring individual success is wrong is because oftentimes that individual success comes at the cost of the people around them. So, yeah, I think that's a very good point to be made, because not only does it get shoved down our throat to say, well, if Oprah can do it, then everybody can. The rest of you are just lazy. I mean, yeah, to listen to that crap over the years is just unbearable.
And it's an unrealistic expectation too.
It is, and it was a fluke that Oprah made it.
Well, yeah, it was a fluke.
She was with some company that didn't believe in her show, and so they foolishly allowed her to own it after 3 or 4 years. And she just took off, and she owned it. That's where most of her money comes from that show. White people underestimating her. And you had a successful show, but that's not gonna. Everybody's not gonna walk into that situation. It's not gonna be everybody.
Most white people won't walk in that.
No, I mean the only other person I've ever heard of that happening to, even a white person, is George Lucas. It's kind of like Star Wars too. Star Wars was going to be.
But that's a perfect point, bringing someone like him up, because sometimes people measuring things as individuals, sometimes things let's say Bill Gates is always brought up as some sort of technological genius, but nobody looks into how his life background, where he's at this age he had Windows or whatever, but nobody goes and says he actually purchased it, and his mom set up a meeting for him at IBM. So it's I don't know, it's like so out there. It's like the whole Oprah, like why are you using that against someone, and then
Right.
but then it's like also if you use an individual, a European individual, it's always like these weird circumstances that get some, and weird as in like, you know, a lot of help.
The individual just becomes an exception in their mind anyway. Like it's not like those achievements aren't applied to us as a like.
No.
Black people aren't viewed any differently just because Oprah did what she did. Like she's just viewed as an exception.
You know, over the last week, I have kind of come to a conclusion that I wonder if humanity in general, you know, forget, you know, black, native, white, whatever. I just wonder if we are, you know, going backwards. I mean, if we're, you know, I mean, as a species, I mean, are we really advancing as a species? Yeah, there's the individuals we can point to. But when I look at how broad ignorance is in so many places, and you see this in this whole nationalist movement that's happening, you know, all over the globe, you know, I just wonder, you know, is mankind, you know, taking a step backwards because we're you know, the ignorance is being, you know, played upon so much and preyed upon so much that it's almost encouraged. Obviously, you look at the American electorate that not just puts Trump in office, but you know, that's a good example of it. But sometimes I just look at the world and I'm wondering, in spite of the individual achievements, mankind as a whole, I'm not sure that we're advancing as a species anymore.
Well, we're killing the place where we live.
Well, that's an example of it right there. Absolutely.
Yeah, like so.
I look at that from the standpoint of, now again, at the beginning of that, John, you said taking race out of it, but I can't take race out of it because you look at the world as it is, it's controlled by white hands. It's controlled by white influence.
But I think he's saying, are we as like a species?
Well, I think you say we are. I'm just saying I would say the reason for that, or a big reason for that, is because of this superficial society, because of this capitalistic society, and the control it has over most of the globe. I mean, even as far down as Australia and New Zealand. And, you know, whether you look at Africa's resources are running out, South Africa, we're running out of water. You look at here on Turtle Island, Native people have been running out of water for a long time.
There's an article, somebody said it on Twitter, they knew that in that town in South Africa where that happened, there was an article in 1999 saying, hey, we're going to run out of water by this time period. And it's,
you know,
we're not taking things seriously. We as a human species, I don't think, are good at like delayed gratification all the time, and we're not good at like. There's a short story. I forget the name of it, but it's like there's 3 villages. There's a village right below this dam that's been built, and this dam is about to break. Like, and when it breaks, like this huge torrent of water is going to come, and it's going to like annihilate the first village. The second village is probably going to damage. The third village will probably be far enough away where there is not a large number of like lives lost. And it's like in the first 2 villages, it's like all about like how the people are trying to like work together and organize. But in the village that's closest, in the village that's in the most immediate danger, the people are acting like nothing is wrong because the reality of the dam breaking is too large for their minds to like comprehend, or like too. What I'm trying to say is that I feel that we as human beings suffer from that. Like if we're dealing with a reality that's too large for our mind, global warming, I honestly sometimes fear is too large for our minds to truly comprehend that we are destroying the earth.
But there's a sense of inevitability that gets adopted by people, and that's the problem.
But these things, some of these global warming, some of these things, one, didn't even close to exist, and then you talk about that, preparing for the future. Look at how, when white folks came over to Turtle Island, Native people were like, yeah, it's going to get cold, y'all. We got to make sure we're warmed up for the winter. White folks like, whatever. I mean, a lot of these problems you look at today that are having us devolve as humans collectively were created or have been maintained, and the solutions for them are being suppressed by the white power structure.
Well, my point is that they're devolving too. That's my point. It's not just, I look at, I mean, white people are just amazing to me how regressed they have become. I mean, maybe they always were. It's just more obvious to me. I don't know.
But I have to agree with what Nolan's saying, that the thing is, we live in a world, technically the whole world's becoming Western. And then we're thinking Western as in European, and then the underlying layer is we're living in their religion. The three dominant religions in the world are Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And I mean, just I'm speaking for myself, I do not agree with anything they say. It's like all of them justify genocide, literally, in all three of their books. So it's like we're living under that world. We're not. Indigenous people sometimes don't think like indigenous people. So and then like Nolan said, a lot of the problems are being generated by the dominant, quote unquote, whatever Europeans. They're dominating. Even though if we scientifically could prove we're all human, but they're dominating everything, and that leaks over the way we think too. So it's like even all the wars you could look at all the wars going on in the world right now. They're all quote unquote. I think they could fit into holy wars. Because even Bush said when he went to Iraq, was like, oh, it's some sort of religious thing or whatever. And it's like we're still stuck in biblical times almost. It's like when they came over, it's like they leaked over all that Bible stuff over here.
And there can be like this religious belief that, oh, God, because I've met Christians, and I'm sure people of other faiths also think like this, oh, God's going to take care of it, or God's going to. One of the things that I like about African spiritualities, or at least the ones that I've been exposed to, like the supreme deity in the Congo, he's not a personable God necessarily. Like, so they believe in like this concept of an ultimate deity, and then like lesser, lower spirits. But this is not like a spirit that beyond creation was believed to like interact with humans on a day-to-day basis. But in the Bible, it kind of talks about how there's a plan for everything, and everything's going to be all right when this person returns. Like, that's a very different narrative. So sometimes I wonder how that sets people up and how they approach things like global warming. Because if you think that we're inevitably going to be saved, we're going to be saved by like the supernatural force.
The script says,
or it's better, Jesus is coming back.
Right? Yeah, then you might not be as worried about like what happens if the earth is uninhabitable.
Legislation is literally being made based on Christian fundamentalist ideas. That's why we're living in a background world, and we're de-evolving because of that.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I think, well, I'll say, so Derrick, you were one of the first black people in this country that I've ever met or come across that practices our old faith, or faith before colonization. I don't know, a high 90%, I don't know what the heck the number is. If you're thinking of the average black person, it's Christianity or atheist, Muslim. So we are so far away from our own value system or spirituality. It takes us away from the old values that we had, and the same could be said for indigenous people. And I'm not blaming either of us as a whole, because they were stripped from us, and they still are. But John, I thought that was funny when you said it seems like white people are devolving, and maybe this is their second 1930s. Because you look at, like you said, all over the world, especially Europe. I mean, there's Nazis all over the place there, and obviously,
and it's rising in Europe now, right now.
It's incredible.
Yeah, it's
and people underestimate how quick right-wing nationalism rises in Europe. Because I saw some people the other day, and they were talking about, things won't get that bad. I mean, I don't. I don't know, man. Like, things get bad, and when things get bad in Europe, they get bad.
Oh, yeah. There's Nazis
fast.
in the German government right now. You know, just like.
And I'm not even just. I'm not saying that like we don't have our own issues with it as well. We obviously do. But there was somebody talking about these African migrants who are being killed, and just like the migrant situation with the EU and how they're dealing with it. I don't know how we got on the subject. We're supposed to be talking about like accomplishments. But maybe our accomplishment is that like it's also that we're like questioning whether like the state we live in today is an accomplishment, whether it is a good thing, and maybe we do always need to kind of be asking ourselves that. And then like
and that's why I think it has to come back to quality of life, because I think we have to acknowledge where so much of this stuff is going wrong, and in a way, you know, that you want to talk about achievement and success, it's going to be able to carve out quality of life in the midst of all this stuff, and not necessarily to take it all on, but to show another way. And I think that's the example, and that's the achievement, that's the success, and that's going to be the excellence that I hope we advance as peoples. So other people say, oh, look, that works. And which is kind of, you know, if you go back, you know, hundreds of years, you can see examples of that in various places, you know, throughout the planet. But it gets co-opted and corrupted, and that's part of the concern.
And to bring it back to the topic at hand of the night, look at feudalism. It was destroying Europe. Europe was on its last legs. Then they started stealing land, resources, and bodies. And oh wow, this capitalism thing is great. Their way only survives if people are suffering. You look at our ways, we succeed by helping each other. So it's two completely different. If you combine the two, but it's two completely
I'm not saying that
different.
That's not true. I want to make it slightly less romantic and just say that because our societies were more collectivized, your rights as an individual kind of only went so far as like the group's ability to survive and to continue on. That's what I think that it is. It's not that like we don't have abuses or didn't ever have any abuses or bad things. There are a lot of examples throughout history that you can go out, even like pre-modern times, of like different societies and cultures like changing their landscapes in such a way that it's not sustainable. I want to say there are certain places like in Thailand and different parts of Asia where rice farming was happening to this extent that was like causing like these long-term, large-scale droughts over a longer period of time. But that's the thing, it was happening over a much longer period of time than, say, global warming seems to be happening now. So it's not that like we never made those mistakes or that we're incapable of making those mistakes. I think it's that because we had a collectivized identity, like if we are not all able to live, we are not succeeding. And I think that's what all of us have kind of been saying in our own ways, that we kind of have to keep our quality of life and then how we're doing as a collective at the forefront of our mind when we talk about, I guess, excellence.
I think that's a good way to end it, because you can kind of look at it like we need each other to survive and we need the planet to survive and to succeed and to be excellent in the first place. And I want to thank everybody on the panel tonight for being on. It's always a pleasure to have all of you, and I hope to see you all back again soon on the panel.
Well, thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Nolan.
You have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.